To this now, the ANC says it has met with ActionSA as part of its 5-day negotiating process to break the impasse over the budget. It describes talks as frank and cordial. The ANC's National Working Committee resolved that discussions on the budget take place with parties both inside and outside the government of national unity. Fellow GNU members, the Democratic Alliance and Freedom Front Plus, last week objecting to adopting the fiscal framework, forcing the ANC to find support outside the GNU. Well, it did manage to pass the budget with the support of ActionSA, which says it supports this budget based on the party dropping its plan to increase VAT by half a percentage point. The Tuli House insisting, though, that negotiations with ActionSA were only about the financial, or should we say, fiscal framework. All right, let's discuss this now. ActionSA National Chairperson Michael Beaumont joining me in studio tonight. Mr. Beaumont, good evening to you and thank you very much for your time. Let's start with the delegation of the ANC that you met. Who led it and how big a delegation was it?
It's a large delegation. It's obviously mandated from their National Working Committee. It was led by their National Chairperson, Gwede Mantashe, and their Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula. But there were a number of members of their National Working Committee that form part of their delegation, and clearly they are following through on the mandate of the NWC that was concluded to reach out to 2 different political parties this week.
You've heard the introduction there that they are insisting that the meeting was purely about the fiscal framework, which was passed in Parliament last week. Was that your experience of the meeting as well, or was there more to this discussion?
Well, actually, it was on our insistence, because while rumours have emerged out of the NWC of a reconstituted GNU, it was ActionSA that communicated yesterday and affirmed today again in the meeting that we will not be available for those kind of discussions. We are dealing with the budget, we are dealing with the VAT increase, and that is the absolute focus of our work right now. If those discussions are to follow, we will be amenable now as we were in June last year. But until there is the removal of these increases from our point of view, there's absolutely nothing to talk about because ActionSA is not part of this GNU. And I think that point you made earlier in your introduction is so important. We find ourselves in a situation where a GNU government made up of 70% of the seats in Parliament cannot pass a budget. This is the crisis that is now requiring opposition parties like ours to come in and resolve this impasse, and it really is a shame that it's come to this.
Let's talk about what exactly it is that you are agreeing on then. I'd like to know from you what it is at that meeting that has been agreed upon about this fiscal framework that was agreed to in Parliament last week. And are you agreeable, therefore? And try and put it in a simple language so that everyone can understand exactly what's going on.
Sure. Well, it was ActionSA that, in the committee meeting of the 1st of April, placed the conditions upon the passage of the fiscal framework that there needed to be the investigation of revenue alternatives instead of the VAT increase that was applied. And I think really what this is following through on that process. We've made submissions into that process of over 100 billion rands worth of alternatives that we think are more appropriate places to take money than it is from the South African people through further tax increases. And really what this meeting was to discuss those alternatives, discuss the feasibility of removing the tax increase in the fiscal framework, and to talk about the legislative pathway to ensuring that this takes place before the 1st of May, where it's due to go up. And from our point of view, I think what was most pleasing, and I think what your viewers would probably be most excited about, is these 2 parties are agreeing today that there's no way we should allow the 1st of May to come and go without this having been addressed beforehand.
So what does it being addressed mean in practical terms? Because I'll tell you this, I tweeted today that FNB and all of the other institutions, financial or whatever it is, they are all sending messages that 1st of May, the VAT is now going to increase to 15.5%. So what guarantees are there that this can be reversed when it looks like a done deal?
Certainly. So I think we must understand the way the law works is that the VAT Act of 1991 prescribes that when the finance minister announces a change to the VAT rate, the date for that implementation is announced by him, comes into effect. And he announced the 1st of May for that implementation date. It was ultimately left to the committees in Parliament and to Parliament itself to ensure the passage of the fiscal framework subject to this process that we are following. The banks and other financial institutions obviously have no choice but to read it as it is right now, which is that there will be a VAT increase come the 1st of May. But what we are putting on the table is that ActionSA and the ANC are going to cooperate together to ensure that sufficient amendments to that fiscal framework are passed between now and the 1st of May that prevent that from taking place.
So is there going to be VAT increase come 1st of May, or is there not going to be VAT increase? Let's be clear.
Well, we are saying that we're going to work with these other parties to make sure that there is no VAT increase. We said that from the 1st of April, and we're saying that again now. And I think what we need to recognize about the milestone that was accomplished today is that the ANC and ActionSA, two parties that collectively come very close to a majority in the Finance Committee alone, are saying we will work to make sure that doesn't happen. We are working to find revenue alternatives instead of increasing VAT. And I think with that, the South African people can have a great deal of confidence to say there's real progress to making sure it doesn't happen on the 1st of May.
Okay. What happens if you're on the losing side? What happens if it does go ahead?
Well, we're not at a point where we want to go and start looking at what Plan B would be. We are solely invested in the idea of Plan A. Plan A must succeed. Plan A is to ensure that there is no VAT increase. So as far as we're concerned, it's Plan A, and then Plan A. And that's the focus that we're going to take into this process.
There is a court process as things stand. It's the Democratic Alliance and the EFF who are saying wrong things happened inside that particular discussion in the committee meeting that took place last week before the actual voting on the fiscal framework. Do you believe that there were any violations? Do you believe that there were procedures that were not followed in terms of this fiscal framework, which has been described by parties like the EFF as the foundation of what ultimately a budget should look like once it is passed in its completion?
Well, I think it must be said for the start that ActionSA doesn't form part of government, even in the executive or in terms of chairing committees like this. So we are obviously not responsible for the procedures of these committees. We've made recommendations in terms of what we believe should be done about the fiscal framework. From our perspective, we don't see these legal challenges as having a prospect of success, because what is required is that the committee must apply its mind and it must create clarity around a fiscal framework going forward. That did take place. It went to the National Assembly. It was adopted in the National Assembly. And really what we find quite odd about this is political parties who participated in this process, seemingly believing it had legitimacy then, but when it produced an outcome with which they didn't agree, they run to court to challenge the legitimacy of the process thereafter. That's obviously their choice. We live in a constitutional democracy where they are free to exercise those rights. But as I said, from our point of view, we think that Parliament fulfilled its mandate to ensure that a clear fiscal framework was implemented. And from that point of view, I don't see how those cases will succeed, especially when they're trying to interdict a VAT increase that clearly there's a process now leading to the 1st of May to stop it from happening.
Yeah. Final question. The ActionSA leader, Herman Mashaba, spoke to us last week, and he says, if invited to the GNU, you will jump at the first opportunity to join that. Is that indeed the position of ActionSA today, given these discussions that you've just had with the ANC?
I think certainly in as much as it relates to our willingness to sit down and talk and to understand what is being put on the table and to understand what role ActionSA can play in service to the South African people. But our organization, with Herman as its leader, has had a conversation that is really to say, let's deal with the VAT increase and the budget issue first before we start talking about anything of that nature. And the GNU, as it is currently constituted right now, in which 70% of the seats of parliament are sitting in the GNU, we would struggle to see how ActionSA would add value by bringing another few seats to that particular equation, when right now we are performing the role of a constructive opposition, holding an incoherent and failing government to account. There's also a number of structural issues as it relates to the GNU. The lack of a clear agreement has clearly caused the kind of confusion that you see going on right now. And all of these things would need to be considered very, very carefully. But right now, ActionSA is focused on the budget, and that will be our focus going forward.
I've dealt with political leaders many a times. You see, what you've just said right now is quite clear, that you're not speaking the same language as Mr. Mashaba. Is there a difference, is there a divide in ActionSA about whether or not ActionSA should join the GNU?
I think as much as it would excite presenters like yourself who want to create that kind of impression, there's absolutely no divide in ActionSA. There is an enthusiasm to see how we can explore the role we can play on behalf of the South African people. I think there's certainly a degree of interest to ensure that we investigate these things, but right now the focus is on the budget, and right now there are very serious concerns about the GNU, how it is structured and how incoherent it has become, that isn't going to be solved by ActionSA joining it in its current format. So we are going to continue as a constructive opposition. We're going to examine the space, and we'll make decisions in time as the picture starts to become clearer.
You and I are going to have to agree to disagree.
We can do that. And I think if you look at what's going on in the GNU, there appears to be a lot of that going on already. But I think from our point of view, it really is important that we focus on this budget and we make that the focus of our attention, and not the question of how we can take up positions of power in government. I think a large part of the reason we have this problem is because the 2 weeks between the national election and the election of the president, all the GNU could negotiate was their way into the back of German sedans, and not a clear plan about how they were going to run government.
Michael Beaumont, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.